moving on, we are coming into our first local forum, which, as I said earlier, I'm excited about this and look forward to what we're going to hear. It's our West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery. And, recall we had committed to, to maybe rotating our meetings around and trying to bring in more input from LIOs and especially from local governments and elected officials that don't have a lot of time to participate. So again, we're starting out in West Sound, and we have these presentations, panels, and they will be facilitated by Commissioner Garrido from Kitsap County. And so I will, Charlotte, I'll hand it off to you and let you introduce the panels and facilitate the discussion. So thanks for doing this, Charlotte.
Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really pleased to be here this morning, and I'm appreciating the creative format of bringing us together in these very troubled times and finding new and interesting ways for us to be able to exchange ideas. For this panel discussion, I'd like to make sure to introduce the panelists. We have Chairman Leonard Sportsman from the Squamish Tribe, Council Member Joe Dietz from Bainbridge Island, Council Member Jenny Luke from Gig Harbor, Mayor Greg Wheeler from Bremerton, and Director Mark Dorsey from Port Orchard. Here in the room with me are some of my biggest support system right here in Kitsap County, Kathy Peters and Kirby Mesabulu Yoga. So thank you both for being here this morning, and feel free to nudge me as necessary. We wanted to offer an overview of the ecosystem recovery planning and water quality challenges in West Sound. As you know, and they'll tell you frequently, that West Sound is a unique area, and we want to show you a little bit this morning about what helps make that uniqueness. As you know, West Sound spans eastern Kitsap County and northern Pierce County. It includes 5 cities: Bremerton, Port Orchard, Paulsbo, Bainbridge Island, and Gig Harbor. All are adjacent to Puget Sound waters. Multiple tribes have usual and accustomed fishing and harvest areas in West Sound. And there are more than 220 miles of shoreline and numerous bays and inlets that support habitat and ecosystems for fish and wildlife. And the transportation system that relies on Puget Sound waterways and an economy that depends on a clean and healthy Puget Sound. So we do have some pretty unique challenges to manage and balance our urban growth with the need to preserve rural character, conserve open space, and restore impacted habitat and ecosystems. The Puget Sound region, as many of us know, expects a growth of more than 1.5 million people over the next 30 years. 1.5 million people over 30 years. It's pretty astounding. As we continue to face marine water quality challenges and a loss of critical habitat, it's really important that we plan for this anticipated growth strategically and in a way that takes into consideration Puget Sound recovery and protection. We must consider the underlying pressure of social inequity, the lack of affordable housing, and the impacts of climate change that will only exacerbate the issues that we face right now. A healthy and thriving Puget Sound community and economy relies on a healthy and clean Puget Sound. We believe we're at a pivotal time with the upcoming local comprehensive plan updates and ongoing work with the 2022 Puget Sound Action Agenda update to ensure planning efforts are actualized. The West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery identified 3 challenges to bring to the ECB. Topic 1 is to integrate salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities in local jurisdiction planning. A panel of local experts with firsthand understanding of the processes, the challenges, and the opportunities to integrate salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities with local jurisdiction comp plans and capital facilities plans and transportation improvement plans. Topic 2 addresses water quality challenges and shellfish downgrades in Chico Bay. Presenters from the Suquamish Tribe and Kitsap Public Health District will discuss the history and importance of the Chico Bay area and current issues that contributed to the downgrade and continuous marine water quality challenges. They will describe the status of addressing these issues, what is working, and where the challenges will be likely in the future. And then thirdly, the topic 3 is about derelict vessel removal and on-water living practices. You can't believe that the vast multiplication of those numbers of vessels just in the last week that we're seeing out in Puget Sound. Presenters will review the issues the cities, the ports, and local law enforcement are facing with derelict vessels and on-water living practices in Sinclair Inlet. We'll also hear from the City of Bainbridge Island Police Department, the Harbor Master, as well as the TNR Project Manager for derelict vessel removal programs about the tools and resources needed to address these important issues. Chairman Leonard Forsman also works to express, also works with these and has some welcoming remarks and thoughts as well. Chair Forsman, did you want to?
Thank you, Commissioner Garrido, for the overview. And I just like to thank everyone for having us here. I feel like we've got a pretty good amount of cooperation in Kitsap. We have a lot of engaged civic elected leaders and great staff at each of those, at the county and the cities that work on this. And of course, our tribe is very engaged. And just want to thank everybody. I got into part of the earlier conversation. The crisis is real. It was expressed yesterday in our meeting with Governor Inslee and his staff during the Centennial Accord. So there was a lot of great anxiety in the country here in Washington regarding the state of our ecosystem. And it's very important that we continue this work, even though we need to go be faster. We need to also engage in some of these activities that you're going to hear about, where the rubber really hits the road, and being engaged in these local efforts and getting our voice out there locally is very important too. So I know everybody's out there doing that, but this is where really a lot of the work gets done. So some of the best use of my time, all of it's good, you're good, but this is some of the best use is I feel my activity, my efforts in working with the West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery, and being a co-chair. That's been one of my favorite meetings, because we do get a lot of things done. We have a long list of projects that need to get funded, and hoping that that's coming soon. So with that, I'll just say thank you and turn it back to you, Charlotte.
Well, thank you, Chair Forsman. So we're going to move into a discussion of integrating salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities in local jurisdiction planning. And we have a panel of several people. You see their names on the screen: Tom Ostrom from the Suquamish Tribe, Nick Bond from the City of Port Orchard, Elizabeth Williams from Kitsap County, and Katrina Knudsen from the City of Gig Harbor. Would each of you like to introduce yourself, your role, and your connection to the topic? And we'll just start with Tom.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name's Tom Ostrom. I'm a biologist with the Suquamish Tribe. I've worked for the tribe for the past 20 years, and I currently manage the tribe's ecosystem recovery program. Broadly speaking, the role of the ecosystem recovery program is the protection of treaty rights and resources. And that leads our program to be engaged in many processes, local, state, and federal, including the local planning. The tribe is a member of the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council. We're involved in a lot of clean water aspects of the Clean Water Act, and we review local shoreline master programs and GMA comp plans. We're very involved in the review of land use proposals that may impact treaty resources or the tribe's ability to harvest or utilize those resources. And we're also involved in federal processes such as CERCLA and state process MODCA to clean up contaminated sites within the area. And we're also involved in doing a fair amount of ecosystem monitoring and assessment work within the West Sound area.
Thank you. And we have Nick Bond from, he's the Community Development Director in the City of Port Orchard.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, Nick Bond, and I am responsible for supervising the Department of Community Development for Port Orchard. Previously, I actually worked down in Pierce County in Eatonville and was heavily involved in ecosystem recovery efforts in WIRA 11. When I was in Eatonville, we did 50 or so large woody debris projects right through the middle of our town on the Michelle River. And unfortunately, I haven't been as involved in this type of work in Port Orchard, but it doesn't mean that I'm any less passionate about it. In Port Orchard, I've been involved in a couple of city initiated culvert removal projects. I administer the Critical Areas Code, the Comprehensive Plan, the Shoreline Master Program, and generally, I work very closely with Public Works on developing capital improvement programs and making sure that that our capital projects are being synced up with ecosystem recovery plans, such as the Blackjack Creek watershed assessment, protection, and restoration plan that was created a couple of years ago with participation from the City of Port Orchard. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Elizabeth Williams, known as Liz Williams, from Kitsap County's Department of Community Development.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Liz Williams, and I'm the program manager for Kitsap County Planning and Environmental Programs Division. Much like Nick mentioned, our team is responsible for coordinating mandated updates to Kitsap County's comprehensive plan and capital facilities plans. And we also oversee the development and revisions of local development regulations consistent with regional and local policies and plans guided by the Growth Management Act and other state and federal laws. Our team is also responsible for coordination of West Sound Partners for Ecosystem Recovery, which, as you all know, focuses on this important work that we're here to discuss today.
Thank you. Katrina Knudsen is Community Development Director in the City of Gig Harbor.
Thank you, Commissioner Garrido. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today to discuss this important topic. I'm the Community Development Director with the City of Gig Harbor, the lone Pierce County city here today with you, although we take our partnership very seriously with all of you in Kitsap County. Similar to Nick and what Liz said, my responsibilities include oversight of all planning, land use, environmental, building, and code enforcement functions for the City of Gig Harbor, including coordination between comprehensive plans, capital facilities plans, administration of the SMP, the CAO, SEPA, et cetera. Additionally, on the Pierce County side, coordination with the Puget Sound Regional Council and the Regional Staff Committee, as well as the Pierce County Regional Council and our Growth Management Coordinating Committee within Pierce County. So that is something that we have that's a little different than the others on the panel, but I know you have something similar with KRCC and PSRC. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so you've all introduced yourselves, so I have a couple more questions for each of you. How do you incorporate salmon ecosystem recovery priorities into your local planning efforts? And some of you touched on that, but if you could be a little more specific, that would be helpful. Let's start with Nick this time.
All right. Well, the city, as I mentioned, we were actively involved, especially in the Blackjack Creek watershed assessment, protection, and restoration plan. And so we have actually integrated that document. We've adopted it by reference into our comprehensive plan. And also, as I mentioned, when we develop capital improvement programs, we're looking to make sure that our projects, as they're developed, recognize the priorities and the issues described in those watershed level planning documents. We don't have as much information on other streams in our city as on Blackjack Creek, which is our highest volume stream within the city. I can additionally say that we have our downtown is on the waterfront, and so one of the things that we recently adopted was a downtown sub-area plan, which calls for redevelopment and enhancement activities downtown. And so along our entire waterfront shoreline, as part of the process of developing a plan for redevelopment, we also looked at all of the restoration opportunities along our shoreline in downtown and identified those as capital projects that are coordinated with downtown redevelopment efforts. So those are two ways that we incorporate those priorities in our local planning efforts.
Great, thank you. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner Garrido. So for Kitsap County, we incorporate salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities in regional and local plans. Specifically, we're heavily involved with multi-county planning policies contained in Vision 2050, developed through Puget Sound Regional Council, or PSRC. So we're active participants there. We also coordinate locally on policies related to our countywide planning policies, which are facilitated through Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council. And then our local goals and policies contained within Kitsap County's comprehensive plan, in addition to our land use alternatives that ensure that we accommodate growth for both people and jobs moving forward, consistent with the Growth Management Act. In addition, for Kitsap County, our local capital programs, in addition to the goals and policies, they help to implement these plans that are developed, in addition to our local development regulations, as Nick mentioned. So for example, here in Kitsap County, our capital facilities planning, such as the 6-year transportation improvement program, assembles projects through multi-phase process. As part of that, there are project scoring criteria that we use, and that current project scoring process does consider environmental retrofit that specifically target the correction of fish barriers identified by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those are awarded additional points as part of that scoring process. In addition, we do have our environmental protections as part of our adopted critical areas ordinance, our shoreline master program, and our stormwater ordinance all help to further and implement these priorities here locally.
Well, we're getting lots of information here. It's pretty exciting. Katrina?
Thank you, Commissioner. I won't go over some of the things that Nick and Liz have previously said, because obviously we do the comp planning and things as well, but some of the additional items, when we're talking about local planning efforts, obviously policy development is very important into the comprehensive plan and our capital facilities plan, and the coordination and concurrency between those two. However, I think one of the most important things that we do is project review and how those policies are implemented into our local development regulations. And then how does the rubber meet the road when our planners, environmental reviewers, civil engineers are reviewing projects? How are we implementing what we're putting as policies within the comp plans? How are those effectuated into actual development? And where we see that is really important is in terms of stormwater. Stormwater is very important with the NPDES permits, as well as tree canopy retention. We've looked at several areas since 2018 to now of our city in particular around critical areas and how we can further enhance the critical areas and their buffers through zoning efforts. And so again, the point I'm trying to make is putting policies in place in the comp plan and the countywide planning policies, et cetera, is very important. But the local planning efforts, really where the rubber meets the road, is where the plans are being reviewed and approved and ensuring that that happens. So I think that, you know, on top of the long-term plans, really what's happening here and now in the short term is also very important. Another example, and I think Liz touched on this a little bit about capital facilities plans and concurrency, is the Parks Recreation Open Space Plan, or the parks element of the comprehensive plan. The state requires for open space that there has to be a certain amount of open space per resident of our jurisdictions. And we utilize that in order to do targeted acquisitions of properties where we know that there's high quality salmon habitat. And Councilmember Wook and Councilmember Denson within the city of Gig Harbor have been instrumental. And we actually just partnered with the Puyallup tribe to purchase about 15 acres of just near the mouth of Donkey Creek of undeveloped property that has very high salmon habitat scoring. So again, the long-term plan, where the rubber meets the road with project review, and then a pros plan targeted annex acquisitions of property.
Wow, some amazing things coming from each of you. Tom, did you want to address this question?
Sure, I have a few things I could interject here. First of all, I thank Nick for mentioning the blackjack plan. That was an effort that was led by the tribe, and I'll say that locally here we do have salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities that are developed at our lead entity and our LIO, and the Blackjack Creek effort was one of those that developed those priorities for that area. We've also developed plans for Curly Creek watershed and the Chico watershed, and also recently completed and had adopted by the LIO a steelhead East Kitsap dip steelhead recovery plan for this area. But I guess I would say that there's a difference between incorporating and integrating. There's an important difference there, and to I guess integrate, we need to I think we need to go a little bit further, and I'll say that although we've done a lot of hard work on these plans, these watershed plans and the steelhead plan, and we have great spatially explicit strategies and actions, that largely those strategies, and those priorities, they exist as standalone documents, and so I guess what we're often doing from the recovery community side of things is that we work to push and advocate for these priorities through the counties or cities funding programs like the Transportation Improvement Program. That's how we've moved some of the high priority culvert projects that were highlighted in the slideshow that Charlotte was showing earlier. So I think that our local comp plans, they do at a bare minimum incorporate these high level goals. But one thing I want to highlight is Kitsap County's comprehensive plan in particular calls on steps that I think in the long run will lead to better integration of ecosystem priorities into our planning. And I'm gonna read from the plan. It's environmental goal number 1, and that is formally treat natural environments, including forest lands, shorelines, freshwater systems, intact ecosystems, and other critical areas as essential asset that is planned for, managed, and invested in to meet the needs of current and future generations. So in other words, we're moving these ecosystem components to the level that we regard our hard infrastructure. And we're looking at these as essential ecological infrastructure that is necessary to support our ecosystem and our salmon populations. I think there's a lot of promise in this approach. I think that we have a lot of work to do to get that working at the local level, and the county is currently leading that effort through an NTA to develop and implement a natural resource asset management program. So just wanted to highlight that one area where I think we have a great deal of promise.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's really valuable to highlight moving ecosystem components as and considering them as essential ecological systems. I think you phrased that really, really well, and maybe we could capture that and kind of keep that as a byline going forward. Thank you. So I want to ask each of the, did I skip anybody? Each of you, from your perspective, what are the challenges to incorporating salmon or ecosystem recovery priorities into local planning? Nick, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. I think that the challenge is not so much incorporating the priorities into local planning so much as it is just implementing those plans. I think we've done a pretty good job of identifying projects, and we're still doing planning efforts. One example is our comprehensive stormwater plan, where we're looking to combine habitat preservation and restoration projects into stormwater management. And I think that the funding sources in actually building these projects and having the resources to design and get these projects off the ground is really the difficulty. We're barely scratching the surface of our transportation plan and trying to take formerly rural roads that are within the city limits and bring them to urban standards to support urban levels of development. And I think it's constructing any type of project, even when it includes these priorities, is incredibly complex and costly. And that to me is more of the bottleneck.
Thank you. Liz, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Just to kind of add on, as Nick was mentioning, implementation I see as one of the biggest challenges. And as I mentioned earlier, one way that we implement that is through our capital facilities program. And our 6-year CFP is funded through a whole host of local revenue sources for projects such as, REIT funding, stormwater fees, conservation futures, and our road levy here, just to name a few. And all have specific state law and case law requirements on the use of these funds. So for example, road funds can't be used outside of the road right away. So that is an additional resource that will require additional resources in order to stretch capital programs to further ecosystem recovery efforts. And even federal transportation funds have significant limitations on what they can be used for. And I think this is an area that needs further integration and consideration related to salmon and ecosystem recovery moving forward. In addition, resources focused on the implementation actions identified in our local ecosystem recovery plans can be unpredictable, and grant awards cannot be relied upon for capital facilities planning or annual capital improvement programs. Kind of moving out of capital facilities and into development regulations, the CAO and our SMP and stormwater environmental mandates are administered through the Washington Department of Ecology, but they all have separate legislative authority and state law and administrative code, which are not always aligned. And that can be a barrier to integration as well. I would say another challenge here locally as it relates to the protection of rural and resource lands is how we balance that with private property rights, and where we don't have, the magnitude of federal or state law lands as jurisdictions such as King County do. And I would also say that because there are multiple organizations kind of coordinating salmon and ecosystem recovery priorities here locally, it can be difficult to integrate those priorities because the actions go beyond the boundaries and authority of Kitsap County into jurisdictions that we don't have legislative authority over, which is another barrier to integration as well.
Thank you. Wow. We didn't allow nearly enough time for this section of questions. Katrina, did you want to add anything here?
I think Liz and Nick did a really great job of kind of teeing up that question for this. I would reiterate competing priorities locally, competing priorities regionally, and then also the challenge is, really, just considering climate change. We have a Pierce County initiative of wanting to integrate climate change, which I know can impact salmon runs. That seems to be a very controversial topic. And at a small jurisdiction such as Gig Harbor, we don't necessarily have the expertise on staff to be able to have those conversations in the scientific way that's necessary to have when we're talking about implementing something such as that. So I would say maybe lack of sustained resources for local governments, really, again, where the rubber meets the road, where we're implementing these things. Funding is definitely an issue in terms of capital facilities projects for culverts, et cetera, but also for implementing new things such as climate change into our development regulations.
Thank you. I'm hearing some patterns coming here. Tom, did you want to add anything here?
Yes, I do. I agree with everything that was said before. We need more money. I think that's the common theme here. Let me take this in a little bit different direction. I think that and again, I would say that there is a difference between incorporating and integrating, but one challenge is that is just the framework of GMA planning. If you distill GMA down to its essence, it basically amounts to a requirement on local jurisdictions to do two things. One, identify and protect critical areas and natural resource lands. And second, to adopt comprehensive plans. They're comprised of capital facility investment plans and a land use element that is comprised of development regulations. Now, I think fundamentally the structure of GMA assumes that our ecosystem and our salmon recovery priorities will be supported by our critical areas ordinances. And actually, so does our Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Plan. And if you go back now and look at that plan from 20 years ago, you'll see that these locally adopted CAOs are really the backbone of salmon habitat protection in Puget Sound. But there's lots of problems with CAOs. First of all, there's poor or incomplete information on where they're located. Second, landowners often ignore or are ignorant of rules about critical areas, and there's little or no consequence for them breaking those rules. Third, there's the CAOs don't address development or activities like zero buffer agriculture that predate GMA, but have ongoing impacts on the environment and our habitats. CAOs depend largely on buffers, but there's generally no requirement regarding the long-term function of those buffers. Many of those areas are degraded, and they'll stay that way for a very long time without some intervention. I guess another problem is that we have many otherwise biddable lots that are encumbered by CAOs, and when that happens, when we have those kind of lots out there, they're going to be built on, and because they're encumbered, they're going to impact those critical areas. They're just impacts waiting to happen. And I guess I could go on talking about the problems with vesting, reasonable use, and other things. But the point is that CAOs alone don't protect and recover habitats. But that's the paramount environmental protection component of GMA. I'll be honest, a lot of us thought that CAOs would eventually move the dial for recovery, back when GMA was first passed and began being implemented at the local level. I think the problem and the challenge is to make ecosystem and salmon recovery priorities integral to the two components of the comp plan under GMA, the land use element in our development regulations and our capital facility investment plans. And I guess I would say that, yes, I do think that jurisdictions should be developing CFPs that specifically identify and fund local investments in conservation and habitat restoration that will improve the ecological infrastructure we talked about earlier that supports these ecosystems and our salmon populations, and concurrently with a growing population. I want to there's another thing I want to say too, and it's a little bit of a story. When I first got out of college in the 1980s, my first boss, of all places at Boeing, he was a conservationist and a bit of an activist. And one thing he told me, in not so many words, was that in order to save Puget Sound, we have to create compact, dense, diverse, affordable, livable urban cities with great public schools and many cultural amenities, and importantly, where the overwhelming majority of our people want to live and work. So that was long before GMA was enacted into state law. I think it was true then, and I think it's true now. And I think that this should be one inevitable and I certainly think a necessary outcome of well-integrated ecosystem and salmon recovery priorities. But the challenges to achieve this are obviously significant, and but I think that we really need bold actions and bold initiatives to advance. In order to advance salmon recovery, we need to identify and break down political, economic, and legal barriers to good urban development that attracts people. You probably won't hear a lot of salmon recovery biologists or tribal biologists making the argument that we need more investment in urban areas, but I think that that's what I'm beginning to recognize, and we don't talk about that much in the salmon recovery world, but I think we should.
Wow, you guys are adding so much wisdom to this conversation. We're going to run short on time, and yet I don't want to lose some of the very important threads that we're hearing here. So my last question is going to kind of narrow you a little bit. What recommendations, and let's just say recommendation one, what recommendation do you have for facilitating the integration of salmon or ecosystem recovery priorities into local planning? And I think that this is a conversation that's going to go beyond today. But let's plant let's do the framework for beginning to address that question. Who wants to be first this time? Who hasn't gotten to be first on the answer?
I'll go first, Commissioner.
Thank you, Katrina.
Limiting to one, I would have to focus on funding and focus on local work to integrate this. I just saw Barbara and Smolko commented in the chat that it's really difficult to integrate SMP, CAO with the comprehensive plans, and I totally agree with that. We're so busy on a typical day, putting out fires from everything to marijuana to sign code that, really sometimes the focused work that even as important as this is, can get lost in the integration process. And I hear what Tom said, and I I think that's very valuable input. But so to make a long story short, funding and focus on the local, funding local jurisdictions, putting a lot more focus locally, I think would get a lot more benefit for this recovery process than, I'll leave it at that. More local funding and focus on local processes.
Great, thank you. Liz, you want to go next?
Sure. So I would just mention that I've seen a few recent draft legislative budget requests at the state level that suggest adding state level staff capacity that would support planning and policy integration at the local level. While technical support provided by the state is great, I don't think that's likely the answer. Instead, as Katrina mentioned, I think we need to move beyond planning and policy development and start focusing on implementation. For this to be successful, we need stable, predictable funding directly to local jurisdictions to implement the actions identified in our recovery plans. And in addition, we need state level legislative reform beyond just the Growth Management Act. For example, the 3 environmental mandates noted above, SMP, CAO, and stormwater regulation should be aligned and avoid conflicts to promote Puget Sound recovery. And I know you said one, Commissioner Garrido, but I can't help myself and recognize that from a policy standpoint, much to Tom's point, there are many competing priorities here. And for example, to address salmon recovery in urban areas consistent with the GMA through local critical area ordinances, we need to recognize that there's conflicts, given that the Puget Sound Regional Council Vision 2050 and GMA mandate the majority of growth into urban areas. And that requirement of urban and rural split development in our targets for planning and accommodating population is increasing significantly and will likely require further consideration of how local CAOs can promote recovery despite the development pressures that are going to continue to occur here locally. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Bond.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that Tom mentioned on the last prompt, which was our critical areas codes. And I think one of the deficiencies in integrating priorities into our local planning is actually the management of our critical areas once they've been protected. And one of the things that we see a lot of in Port Orchard is that these critical area buffers and critical areas will be put into tracts that are owned by HOAs, or they're still privately held. And after development has occurred, and once those areas have been set aside, there's no ongoing management of those areas. And I think, you know, we have some critical area buffers that now are full of homeless encampments. We have other areas where there's illegal dumping, invasive species, and there's no management piece to the critical area system, at least in Port Orchard. And speaking back to my experience in Pierce County when I was working with Eatonville, you know, the Nisqually Land Trust has huge land holdings and is a huge resource for sort of managing property. And you know, we would have volunteer events where hundreds of volunteers would show up to do invasive species removal. And I don't feel like that same level of stewardship exists on the peninsula, at least in the south end of the peninsula, to the extent that I saw in the Nisqually Basin. And so I think maybe there needs to be a little bit more emphasis on managing our critical areas and the ongoing maintenance of those properties beyond simply just setting aside and not developing them. And maybe that's a missing link.
Tom?
These are great ideas, great comments. And I was just looking at the chat and I noticed that my old friend Dave Summers put a comment in there. If we don't focus growth in our existing urban areas, it will go to more rural areas where our remaining habitat is. And I totally agree. And I really think that we need to hold the line on UGAs. In fact, I would support just making them permanent where they are now, and work to concentrate our growth within those UGAs. I want to say something else though, and I think that I want to say something about mitigation actually, and I think we're often distracted by the latest proposals to improve mitigation, whether it's a novel banking approach or net ecological gain or any number of other proposals. I really think that as a region, we need to get to a place where compensatory mitigation is extremely rare or non-existent, because we don't have proposals that impact our ecosystems, and that requires really good planning. We have to live within our UGAs right now. I think we have our ports and our military facilities. They need they need to learn to live within a smaller footprint and be just as effective in their operations. What we need to, if we're in 50 years, if we're still mitigating, shoreline armoring or, wetland fill or, impacts on our streams, or we're still correcting culverts, I mean, there's going to be very little left to protect. And so it really is critical that we do a good job on the planning side. And I think I agree with Liz. I think there is going to need to be some statutory changes to change the structure of our GMA to force a better integration of ecosystem recovery into comprehensive planning. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Let's take a few minutes to open this up for a broader conversation. We've seen quite a few questions and comments coming through the chat. And this is such a rich conversation. I'm so glad that it's being recorded so we can go back and review some of the comments and questions that have come up that need to be addressed beyond today. But are there questions or comments at this time? And I have Kirby here capably assisting me in locating who's got their hand up or who wishes to speak. David?
Good morning, Commissioner and panelists. This has been a great conversation. Thank you all for this. And Nick, you are certainly missed in the Nisqually, and welcome home anytime, my friend. So I had a couple of ideas that are coming out of this, and more forward-looking than looking back over our shoulders. If GI were here, he would say, this is really good, and we've done some really good things, but we're not doing enough of it fast enough. And so to that end, how do we expedite? How do we move this more quickly? The processes that we rely on to make change take so long to make those changes. We're running out of time for the fish. So a couple of ideas that I've had, and I think I've shared with Tom, and I'm curious about all of your perspectives. One would be, can we develop something akin to the capital improvement programs under GMA for natural capital? Can we develop a 10-year list of projects that would be done by local governments to improve the environmental baselines with metrics, and then hold each other accountable for that and work together to find funding to implement those things? The capital investment programs are incredibly successful. You do describe what you need to do, and a lot of that stuff does get done within the time frame of the comp plans. But we don't really have the same kind of lightning rod on environmental issues, and I'm wondering if that would make sense. So I'd put that out there. And then the second question, I'm sorry, but I'm going to pack two in here, is from my perspective, GMA was written to facilitate growth and provided a means of trying to minimize the impact on the environment. If we were to start today anew, set aside GMA, set aside all of our previous understandings of how growth occurs, and were to design something going forward that primarily would be protecting salmon and salmon habitat first, and then accommodating growth around that goal, what would that look like in your minds? And how would that look different from where we are now? And is it possible to have that kind of conversation to inform our electeds on the real change? I can go on, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you guys very much. This has been awesome.
Well, you also had a couple of awesome suggestions. So how do we capture those and activate them? Other questions, comments? Josh Baldy, thank you.
Agree with Dave and everybody else. Thanks for the great conversation panel. And I want to acknowledge this conversation about natural asset management is a topic that King County has been. We have a study ongoing. We talk, everybody's familiar with levels of service around asset management. It's about time we figure that out in our green infrastructure as well, because it's pointed out, and this has only been accentuated, we all know, with the current homeless crisis. But even before that, it's just like, how do we properly steward these lands, not only for their natural features, but also to be good neighbors to the folks that live next to these lands. A question, though, I have for the panel specifically is there is a bill still alive in the session around net environmental gain, and that would be a required element of comprehensive planning. And I'm curious, you spoke pretty eloquently to how those concepts have been integrated into your current planning processes. We here at King County are looking at the bill, trying to understand if this comes to fruition, how might that, because we're looking at a comp plan update in the next couple of years. Suspect we'd have more time than that, but just really trying to understand practically, how long would it take? How would things really look different? And if you've thought about that, that bill, do you think it would materially affect your current comprehensive plan, or do you feel like you're already there?
Fabulous questions. Yeah. Is there anyone from the panel who wishes to answer that question or address that question?
I would like to address it.
Please do, Tom.
Thank you. I am familiar with the bill that you mentioned, Josh, and I think that your comments and David's earlier, I think that it could be improved greatly by, and I know that local jurisdictions don't like to hear this, but adding a requirement for local jurisdictions to include capital facilities plans for this ecological infrastructure, and that should be developed concurrent with the land use planning.
I can also
go ahead, Nick.
I can also take a stab at this. I think we're part of the way there on identifying the projects, though it hasn't been through the lens of net ecological gain. It's simply identifying enhancement projects that are a priority for the city and its residents. But I think, when it comes, again, back to funding, those types of projects are typically general fund type projects, or they're going to have to be grant funded projects. And so I don't know how you adopt, as David suggested, a capital improvement program for ecological projects without also giving our legislative bodies the ability to raise the revenues necessary to fund that. And so it's not even a matter of the will. I think it's unlikely, at least in my community, that the voters would pass some sort of levy or some other voter enacted measure to do this. And so it's going to fall to the city council to find that revenue source. And I just don't know that the tool exists to implement that sort of effort. But as long as that's part of the conversation, I think it's achievable. And I think we're not that far off in terms of our comprehensive plans.
I just wanted to add on to the discussion on levels of service, specifically to natural assets. Give a shout out to Matt Medina on our team and Charlotte Dorn, who have been pivotal in this work here at Kitsap County. They're, in the midst of trying to grapple with this concept of how do you apply kind of the traditional level of service that we think of when we look at our transportation networks here locally, and how you would apply that to natural assets. And I think that's a definite need and focus area that then helps to inform local comprehensive planning and capital facilities planning, and will allow and afford for integration moving forward. But it's definitely at the foundational stages of development, and do encourage that to continue to help move the needle and help restore Puget Sound.
From a macro level, I think the GMA, we're to plan for the environment. From the more when you get into the meat and the potatoes of it, as I think Liz was just talking about, under the GMA, under the capital facilities plan element, under the housing element, there are required metrics that we must evaluate, inventory, and plan for. So there are areas of the GMA that are very specific about what local jurisdictions must do. And so that really doesn't give choice when we're going through our comp plan efforts. We must do those things. We must inventory and plan and talk about them. It's not as clear, and I think Tom was talking about that in the integration between all of the different policy documents. It's not as clear about what we are supposed to do or what we're required to do under the GMA in terms of I'm really interested in this natural asset management. I think that has great potential, and I look forward to being a part of that. But putting that, if that is going to be required, similar to how capital facilities and housing is talked about in the GMA, much more specificity would be needed to make that required so that we could get past the local discussion of why are we doing this? Is it important? And getting down to the actual work of making it happen.
Thank you. This has been, we're running a little bit late, but what a rich conversation. And clearly we needed a lot more time to dive into the details and still need that time. So I believe that Chair Sportsman and I will probably have an offline discussion between now and the next meeting, or even set a special meeting to dive into this topic, very important topic, in much more depth. Did I see a hand up before we move on to our next topic?
Yeah, I just something that some of the comments just now by Katrina kind of spurred a thought of mine, and I just wanted to say, I think that the condition of our environment, especially our aquatic environments, they're a perfect biophysical integration of what we as humans are doing on the landscape, and so and we're going to hear about this later, but how are our shellfish growing areas doing? Can we safely harvest and consume clams on beaches? What about our local salmon populations? Are they abundant and productive? Forage fish, eelgrass, kelp forests. How about our freshwater habitats? Are they clean and healthy? Are they accessible? Our forests, floodplains, our stream flows, riparian areas, are they functioning as they should to support a healthy ecosystem? And our Puget Sound vital signs, the dashboard indicators, if they're good indicators, they should be a reflection of how well we're doing in terms of integrating our conservation and recovery priorities into local comprehensive planning. So when we look at levels of service, we just need to look at the perfect expression of our integration is how well our shellfish growing areas are doing, how well our salmon are doing. So, that's the ultimate measure to me about how well we're doing.
So Tom, you actually should have been facilitating this discussion, because you're actually setting us up for our next topic, which is water quality challenges with shellfish downgrades. And to speak to that, we have some presenters, including Paul Williams, Shellfish Management Policy Advisor for the Squamish Tribe, Jeff Moore, the shellfish biologist, also for the Squamish Tribe, Grant Holdcroft, who's the pollution identification and correct program manager at Kitsap Public Health District, and Toby Stewart's environmental health specialist at Kitsap Public Health District. Before we move to this important panel, I wanted to thank the panelists, mainly the one that we are just wrapping up. I can't believe what a fabulous discussion this has been. I am eager to be able to review the recording of what has been said, so that we make sure that we don't drop any of the important topics and points that have been made this morning. With that, let's move to the water quality challenges with shellfish downgrades panel. And we have the speakers of as I said, Paul Williams, Grant Holcroft, and Toby Stewart. Who wants to begin?
I guess I'll begin.
Okay, Paul.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Paul Williams with the Suquamish tribe, and the focus of this session is on pollution. I think we have some slides, but we'll just jump into this here. The first slide is a map of the region, and you can see Chico Bay is the area that was downgraded. That's in the orange box, kind of yellowish mustard colored box down there. And you can see all the development that has happened around the sound. So the focus of this session is the pollution sources that impact shellfish growing areas in Dyes Inlet, specifically around those around Chico Bay, which led to a downgrade of that area. Our hope is that you can help us find solutions to maintaining healthy waters in the region. My colleagues at the Kitsap Health District will present a detailed account of the work they are doing to identify and control pollution from a variety of sources that impact shellfish growing areas downstream. But first, I'd just like to present a little bit of history about the area, the work we've done to classify the area for shellfish harvest, and the benefits to Suquamish and the region of improving water quality in Dyes Inlet. So the next slide is a map of the area in 1881. And you can see the various residents of people who live there. One of them is William Chico. He was a leader of Suquamish bands living along Dyes Inlet in 1850s and around 1850 to 1910. As the settlers moved in, he had to make a choice: lose his ancestral lands and move to the reservation at Port Madison, or renounce his tribal citizenship and purchase his land. He chose to stay, and there's a lot of Suquamish who still live in the area. And when Washington became a state, as you know, in 1895, the state ignored the treaties, and the tribes in the 60s had to go sue the state and to regain rights to access salmon. In 1974, they regained those rights, and in 1994, they regained access to shellfish. Next slide, please. But by 1994, here's a picture of Port Washington Narrows. In 1994, the rich shellfish beds were too polluted for human consumption. Development around the Bremerton area outpaced sewer infrastructure improvements. And when it rained, raw sewage, next slide, would run into Port Washington Narrows from all these CSOs in Port Washington Narrows. Sorry about that. CSOs would often fail when it rained, and the raw sewage would run right in to Dyes Inlet. In 1992, the Puget Sound Keeper Alliance sued the city of Bremerton under the Clean Water Act. The city settled and spent the next 10 years and $50 million to upgrade the treatment and conveyance systems to address the CSOs. It worked pretty well, but before the Department of Health could classify the waters for shellfish harvest, they had to figure out what would happen if a CSO failed in the future. So the Navy had also been sued by Puget Sound keepers. They needed to develop a NPDES permit, and the Navy decided to calibrate the model using data from Dyes Inlet. The Navy formed a partnership with the Kitsap Health District, the city of Bremerton, the Washington Department of Health, and Suquamish to conduct drogue and dye studies to inform that model. Next slide is a picture of the drogue studies. And well, here's the outcome of the drogue study, and you can see the concentration diminished as the tide swept the dye into Dyes Inlet. And the next photo should be the drogue study. That was a dye study. Here's the drogues, and it's great working with the Navy because they have all this great equipment. Next slide. The outcome of the drogue study, you can see how the circulation doesn't get all the way to the to the edge of it kind of starts circulating around the center of the bay. And then finally, the next slide is the actual model that was produced. And we'll see if well, it doesn't look like it's going to run, but if it was running, you would see that the pollution from OF08 right there in the middle would not make it to the eastern shore of Dyes Inlet. Next slide. So by 2005, the area had been certified by the Department of Health, but we had this one last hurdle to overcome. There's a lot of controversy with tribes coming in and starting to harvest on intertidal areas. But we got through that. And now, next slide. Harvest started. And next slide. We have, if you look closely, you can see all these little areas are individual parcels along the eastern shore of Dyes Inlet. There's 220 of them, and each one we manage for shellfish harvest. The ones in red, we lease from the property owners, so we can replant those and get harvest back quickly, faster. We do a rotation and harvest each one every 3 years. Next slide. Clams, we've reached the peak harvest year was in 2018 when there was 304,000 pounds harvested at a value of $570,000. There's 76 tribal members who participate in these harvests. The area that was downgraded is in Chico Bay, and that's where the tribe had installed an oyster growing facility. And it closed now, but because of the closure. But when it is reopened, hopefully soon, we project that it'll be producing about $250,000 worth of oysters per year. And we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years, but there are more areas that need to get opened. Oyster Bay is one of them. And in addition, as more people move into the area, this area has a lot of older houses with old septic systems. They're probably going to start to fail more, and it's going to get harder and harder to maintain water quality. Now, that's what I've got for this. And now Grant Holcroft will describe the extensive work that Kitsap Health District is doing to identify and address the sources of pollution in Dyes Inlet. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. I'm Grant Holcroft. I'm the program manager for the Kitsap Public Health District's Water Pollution Identification and Correction Program. And I'm here today with Toby Stewart to share with you the purpose of our PIC program, what we do, how we responded to the Chico Bay downgrade, the challenges that lie ahead for Chico Bay, and our long-term concerns. Next slide, please. Since 1995, the mission of the Water Pollution Correction and Identification and Correction Program has been to protect the public from waterborne illness and other water quality related hazards. Water polluted with fecal pollution is our primary focus. Our job is to ensure that surface waters are safe and sanitary so that the public doesn't get sick when they recreate, fish, or harvest shellfish for consumption. Next slide, please. Our PIC program is nationally recognized for being innovative, effective, and sustainable, with stable funding source from Clean Water Kitsap. The health district continues to partner as the agency responsible for monitoring, identifying impaired waters, and prioritizing fecal pollution for identification and correction. Next slide, please. PIC uses an evidence-based model of an evidence-based approach to prioritize polluted water bodies for investigation and correction. Our PIC protocol manual establishes methods based on data from streams, lakes, and marine water. Next slide, please. These methods of assessment and correction include shoreline surveys, which identify pollution hotspots, where we segment, bracket, sample, investigate, leading us to pollution sources such as failing on-site septic systems, sewer leaks, animal and wildlife waste. We also do complaint investigation for surfacing sewage and sewage odors, homeless encampments, and RV discharges. We investigate deficient pump reports from our septic monitoring and maintenance program. We do sewage spill response, investigation and notification. We also investigate illicit discharges from RVs and campers to stormwater systems. We do sanitary surveys of parcels. We dye test for suspected failures and surfactant testing for gray water discharges. And we inspect marinas to ensure that there's proper disposal of sewage. Next slide, please. The umbrella under which we operate is the education and prevention model, where we build relationships by providing education and technical assistance to prevent and correct problems. Using our local health regulations, we remain adaptable and flexible, using enforcement only when it's needed. Next slide, please. The sources of bacterial pollution that we've identified in Kitsap County are failing septic systems and side sewers, sewage spills, illicit discharges from RVs and campers, pet waste, agricultural and farm waste, and wildlife waste. Next slide, please. And here's a slide, just some of our highlights from our last year of work. We did all of this work in the middle of the COVID pandemic. I have 7 people on my staff, and 6 of them were working in COVID plus me. And we still managed to get some work done, amazingly. Next slide, please. Since 1996, more than 5,000 acres of Kitsap County shellfish beds have been upgraded to approved for harvest. We believe this indicates the effectiveness of PIC program over the last 25 years, and certainly don't mean to diminish any work done by our partners. We love the work done by our partners. Next slide, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Toby Stewart. So first, let me share with you some good news. So we are on the verge of hopefully having the Department of Health approve shellfish harvesting in the eastern portion of the Chico Bay as early as summer 2022. So just as Grant just mentioned, our PIC program is pretty effective. Next slide, please. So what are the sources of a downgrade? Well, we believe that the shellfish area downgrade in the Chico Bay area is a cumulative bacterial loading issue from the Chico Creek drainage and into the marine waters. We believe that by identifying and eliminating the bacterial pollution sources, we are seeing a reduction in the cumulative loading. These cumulative sources are comprised of things like, next slide, please. Back a slide. There you go, thank you. Wildlife impacts within the watershed, septic system failures, sewer infrastructure releases, pet waste in the Erlands Preserve and 2 large apartment complexes nearby, the lack of adequate stormwater infrastructure and treatment, and agricultural impacts from small farms. Next slide, please. So just take a second and look at this map of the Chico Bay response area. It's broken down into sub watersheds for targeted investigations. Each corridor has its own unique drainage. This is how we approach our work. Next slide, please. Since 2017, this is the work that we have done in the Chico Bay response area. We have developed and implemented the Chico Bay Shellfish Closure Response Plan. And this is what works so well for PIC, because it gives us the ability to respond to threatened areas and downgrades so quickly. With that plan, we have surveyed over 100 parcels. We have corrected over 15 failures. We have conducted 2 full Chico Bay shoreline surveys with no direct discharges found during monitoring. We have extensively monitored Chico Creek at over 17 stations with no tributaries identified with bacterial levels above the water quality standards. Next slide, please. We have also identified and corrected most pet waste areas of concerns that included 2 apartment complexes nearby, Erlin's Preserve, and Chico Bay's public access area. We identified and corrected 4 agricultural waste concerns, eliminating potential runoff pollution. We inspected public sewer utilities in the area. We responded to 2 lift station spills and posted contact advisories. We identified more than half a dozen homeless camps near Chico Creek and critical drainages into Chico Bay. And we observed and recorded a variety of bird species in the estuary, in Chico Bay, and the Erlin's Preserve, noting the accumulations of bird droppings. Next slide, please. There you go. So what immediate challenges lie ahead for PIC? Well, for now, it's the low-income households with failing septic systems that can't afford to replace or repair these aging systems. And here is an example on North Lake Way. These slides represent the example. I inspected this property and found a relief hole filled with sewage, as the pictures show, that was not directly discharging into surface waters. The owner is a widowed elderly woman who has a very low income and is disabled. Her home is currently in a reverse mortgage. She has a family member living in the RV you can see in the slide, who invites homeless individuals to live in a shed in the back to supplement her income. This homeowner is not eligible for the commonly used CRAF 3 clean water loan. Why? Because she can't afford it, because her financial situation. Next slide, please. Here is another example off Chico Way. The septic tank at this property was overflowing and covered with a piece of plywood when I inspected it, but it was not directly discharging into the surface waters. The tank was overflowing for about 4 to 5 months before I found it. And it's important to note that this house was constructed in 1935 and has absolutely no septic records. The owners are elderly and disabled and have little money to repair or replace the system. They have been working with a professional lately for some phased minor repairs to keep the sewage under the ground, but they have not found a permanent solution yet. Why? Because the owners just can't afford the total cost of the full replacement that's needed. So where does this lead us? The rich history of the Chico Bay and the Suquamish tribe, the valuable resources of Chico Bay and its ecological importance to the area, the undeniable need for the Health District's PIC program in Kitsap, and the important work that we're still doing to protect Chico Bay. It leads us all to the same long-term concerns. Next slide, please. So what we would like for the ECB to consider are the following on these slides. The first is to help us, or at least guide us to create a pilot program that will help us find funds to help these people who can't afford these septic repairs or replacements, and kind of modeled after the Kitsap Shore Friendly program. Then continued funding of the CRAF 3 program, the USDA home repair program, and continue funding to the Public Works Trust funds. Next slide, please. So that concludes our presentation. On behalf of the Suquamish tribe and Kitsap Public Health, we would like to thank you for your time and the opportunity. We are happy to take any questions at this point.
Okay, wonderful presentation and great information. I think this is, good news on the reopening. We wish, of course, it was sooner, but we really appreciate all the effort that has gone into trying to find the sources. Like I put in the chat, I thought there'd be one culprit that we could just say, here it is, let's fix this and all be taken care of. But obviously, there's a number of cumulative impacts. But I think it's important just to note 2 things. One, that these, as you know, these clam digging beaches are very important to our people. And I just want to say, give a heads up to thanks to Paul and the Shellfish Department, because our clam digging opportunities are increasing, And there is, a real opportunity for people to make a living in their traditional way and be outside on the beach with their friends and family and have a great experience. And it's been increasing over time. When I started on council, which was over 30 years ago, there were a lot of these beaches that were closed. Like Dyes Inlet, I just went, it's contaminated, it's closed, it'll never open. And it opened. And then it was Liberty Bay. Liberty Bay has been closed forever. It's been contaminated, it's EC certified, never opened. It opened. I got to be more optimistic. So there is some things that we're doing on the ground, and this is really important to hear, and I really appreciate it. And and then I think there's a number of things that are going through my mind on these homes that maybe we can work together to address, because we do, in the tribes want to take care of our elders, and when our elders are in a bad situation, we try to help them. So this is something maybe we can start thinking about outside the box. But are there any questions anybody had? Jesse, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. This was a great presentation. Thank you. I think my question is, I just yesterday watched Ecology's presentation about the new nutrient permit, nutrient general permit, which was great. And I'm just trying to think about how the intersection, and would love if anybody can chime in. I mean, I'm thinking about the presentation that I saw at the Leadership Council meeting where King County presented, I think, how much it would cost for them to upgrade treatment plants in King County to meet the new requirements for the nutrient permit. And I think it was like $10 billion. I mean, it was a huge amount of money. And they had proposed maybe that money having some flexibility where they could pay other jurisdictions for higher priority work. So they have said, asked for the flexibility. My understanding is they've asked for the flexibility to be able to say, like, could they take some of that money, meet a lower standard at one of the treatment plants that would be very expensive to meet the permit requirements, and then instead pay for wastewater treatment plant or septic upgrades in another part of King County, another part of Washington State where the nutrient issues are significantly greater. I just wonder if these two conversations are happening. I wonder if we can kind of connect the dots, and if there is a pilot to be had here where King County may support some of this work to see if it could be a lower cost way of getting more quickly to the outcomes under the nutrient general permit.
Okay, Paul's going to answer that question, and we're over time, so I'm going to take a couple more, but if we can keep the questions and answers crisp, that would be great. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I think the critical gap here is $2,000 to $4,000 per failing septic. There are programs like Crowd 3 available if you have enough money to repay them. But in this case, the people just don't have the money, so they're not eligible. There's a USDA program that can come in and fix septics, but you need to have a $2,000 to $4,000 septic design, repair design. So it's that very small amount of money. That's the gap between what low-income people can afford to pay and to get the help. So I think that's one focus. Maybe Grant or Toby, you've got more to add.
No, you're absolutely right. The USDA process is kind of onerous, and we recently, one of my staff recently took a property owner through it, and they basically had to do the work on the application themselves because it was a mess. But having said that, once you get through the process and you have a design, as Paul just mentioned, that $2,000 to $4,000 gap, you can get your septic system paid for. Now it has to be, there's other requirements. You have to be rural, you have to be outside of a city, so that doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot of them. Now, having said all of this, we don't want to kick people out of homes. We do not want to contribute to the homeless issue. If we have to, and I've done it, I have vacated homes. I said, no one can live here anymore. There's not a functional septic system here. You may not live here anymore. But I do not do that to destitute people. Like, we don't do it to old disabled couples. You know, that's just wrong. And so what we're doing is we're trying to help these people who do not have the resources and don't have any other place to go.
You know, that's one of the reasons we suggested the shore, to model something like the shore friendly program,
Right.
where you can get a grant of $5,000 to do for someone to come and design your bulkhead removal, and there's no strings to that. There's no means testing. You just get the money. But here you've got, you know, folks really, it boils down to an equity issue also. And it's a human health concern. It's not just the shellfish, but those people are living in a constant threat of disease. It's not healthy. So
Right,
Yes.
right. Okay, we're going to go ahead, take one more question, and then we're going to move on to derelict vessels. So, Barbara Ann, quick question, easy answer.
Oh man, I don't have a quick question. I was just going to say that we've been going through this with Pierce County too, and we've actually just decided to set aside an extra $60,000 per year. We've applied to the combined fund to match that if we can, to fill this gap, because Craft 3 actually does a great job of helping most people. They do a great job, but occasionally they'll get somebody they really cannot help. And sometimes it's because they just can't get there. They need a lot of help putting the application together. You know, if you're kind of having trouble keeping it together and keeping your septic going, it's not that uncommon to, you know, have trouble doing other sorts of dealing with other aspects of modern life. So we've got some other federal housing programs, not just USDA, that we send people to there, but when it falls apart, we've also decided to create a little backup fund of our own. And the priority there is really about water quality. But I think this is a great idea for us to continue to discuss, because there's good programs in place, but there are some gaps, and trying to figure out how to fill those gaps is a good idea. Because we will use our funding. People can get the design paid for too, as part of that. So
Great. All right. I'm going to leave. Toby, do you have a closing comment for us? Mr. Stewart?
No, I don't have really. Like I saw a question up in the chat. You know, that one example that I gave. They didn't qualify. The reverse mortgage put them over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that's a bigger gap too. You know, can we find that? I mean, it's just a whole nother issue. And
that's why we've started that backup of a backup program, because there are still a few people who fall through the net.
Yeah.
Great.
And that was
all right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it back to Charlotte. We're running behind. So, Charlotte, you want to go ahead and take on the next one? Thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. Yes, it is awesome. And I wish we had a whole lot longer to carry on this conversation. But it looks like we do need to move over to managing derelict vessel removal and on-water living practices. The presenters here are Mark Dorsey from the Public Works Department in the City of Port Orchard, Tammy Allen, the Harbor Master at the City of Bainbridge Island Police Department, and Troy Wood, the Derelict Vessel Removal Program Manager at the Department of Natural Resources. Thank you for being here today. And Mark, do you want to start?
Okay, thank you and good morning to everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So as I was watching this, I was making notes, and I think if I had a title to my piece, I would call it The Break in the Chain. So again, and I'll get to that later. So again, my name is Mark Dorsey. I'm the Public Works Director, City Engineer for the City of Port Orchard. I'm also a Public Works State Board, Public Works Board member, and do have some legislative understanding, and hope that the solution for this lies in the legislature. I'm also here representing a City of Port Orchard Police Department, local port districts, as this is specific to Sinclair Inlet, City of Bremerton, but this is a Puget Sound problem, Paulsbo, throughout the Puget Sound. So as I kind of go through this, we're going to start a video, and I guess Kirby, you can go ahead and start that video. It's a drone flight from earlier this month, and what you're going to see in that drone flight is you're going to see basically three types of vessels. You're going to see derelict vessels, you're going to see sunken vessels, beach vessels, and you're going to see just derelict vessels, which just unoccupied, abandoned, and then you're going to see occupied vessels. We were very strategic in our language on this situation to call it on-water living, because we didn't want to unfairly tarnish transient boaters, which there's one boat in here that is a transient boater that is following the DNR regulations about anchoring in one spot no more than 30 days, and in the Puget Sound no more than 90 days in a year. So it's important to recognize that we're dealing with the on-water living situation. And when you're dealing with the on-water living situation, with the abandoned boats, you're dealing with plastics that are decaying when they beach or they sink. There's oils, there's holding tanks, there's navigation issues because they're not putting up anchor lights at night. They're in the navigable waters. There's security issues. We recently had a storm here where 4 boats washed up onto the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard security fence. On a normal day, you can't get within, I think, 300 to 500 feet of that fence. They had 4 boats on the fence. One had a person in it that they had to rescue. So in dealing with the on-water living situation, you're talking about not only environmental issues, boats that haven't moved in a year or more, they're not pumping out. Everything that a human can create waste-wise is going right into the bay. So there's obviously, we have a TMDL requirement in Sinclair Inlet that we're just fighting against ourselves because we have a massive point source, quite honestly, with these, on-water living vessels. And then again, just the boats that are sinking, that sink with whatever's aboard, and they just start contributing to what's in the water. So the good news is that having met with the DNR and with the city of Bainbridge earlier, confirmed that, there are programs in place. The DNR, there are state laws that help manage this situation. The problem, in my opinion, and that's the break in the chain part of my presentation, is the DNR relies upon local jurisdictions to do the documenting, the investigations, the ticketing, the process working through enterprise services, to get to the point to where DNR can then reimburse somebody, 90% up to that cost. The problem is that local jurisdictions, and I understand that Bainbridge does have Tammy Allen, she's their harbor master code enforcement. There are other jurisdictions that have similar positions. I don't think Bremerton has a position. I know Port Orchard doesn't. Our police department, our public works department, our code enforcement, we're not trained. We don't have the staff. We're not budgeted. We're not even tasked with this process. We've helped and we've worked with DNR in the past in trying to deal with the situation. But as with the Homestead Act creating even further buffers and barriers to this situation, it's really unattainable to think that the DNR can rely upon local jurisdictions to be a viable partner. Possibly, Commissioner Gardo, that through Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, we talked about shared assets a few years ago. Maybe there's a possibility that Kitsap County in this particular area could have a shared asset, which is a countywide harbor master code enforcement person that would utilize the local jurisdictions boats to get out onto the water. But that's a different conversation, in my opinion. The bigger conversation And the big solution to this is for the Washington State Legislature to adequately fund DNR, not just at its current levels and staffing, but increased so that that break in the chain could and should be provided through the DNR in the state, so that you have a state employee, FTE or FTEs, that are going out and doing all the work that it takes to categorize, document, notice, go through the process of identifying whose boat is it if it's abandoned. If people are living on it, how are we going to deal with them in a Homestead Act kind of situation? So I think that's really what I have to say is this is really the state of Washington needs to step up to the plate and deal with this situation adequately, because the laws are in place to manage this. The programs are in place to manage this. It involves the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Enterprise Services. The missing link is the boots on the ground piece, which again, I think the legislature should provide the funding for, because again, having the DNR rely on a small port district or a small city, that's just not viable. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Tammy, do you want to take the microphone?
There. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to meet this whole group and hear all the other topics. As Mark said, this is about a 20-year process to get to this point. In '99, we developed a harbor management plan because we had, similar to Sinclair Inlet, we had a lot of boats underwater, a lot of boats on the beach, long-term anchored vessels, and the residential use piece of it. We were unique in that we wanted to maintain the residential use piece, and we needed to figure out a way of doing that. Since that time, we've got Troy and we've got the Derelict Vessel Removal Program. So we were able to pull those issues apart, the residential use being resolved through it's called the Dave Ulen Open Water Marina. But I'll tell you, it is at capacity now. So we did fill our marina and we have a waiting list. So the housing issues will continue. On the Derelict Vessel Removal Program, it really started with the prevention. So I do have the support of vessels and my own vessel. I'm able to ticket registration as soon as a vessel arrives, and that starts the prevention piece of it, of doing registration enforcement. We count how many days a vessel is anchored, so that on day 31, we've had a conversation with the owner who might not be aware of our state laws about overtime anchoring. And that's also when we get to take a look at the boat, seaworthiness, sewage compliance, prevention of oil spills, the depth that the vessel is anchoring so that we're not damaging vegetation. All of that does fit into a harbor management plan. So I've been with the city for 21 years and we manage the waters of the city. And it is a lot of area, as Mark alluded to. Kitsap County has a lot of water. So I also have volunteers. And now that we've had a robust program for as long as we have, the boaters themselves are my team of volunteers. So if you can start to educate your local boaters and your shoreline property owners that 30 days is enforceable, and I do enforce it. And so once you start a program that is ongoing and they know you are going to tag the boats on behalf of DNR and you will follow through, you'll have fewer on the desk. I think I told Kristen the other day, I had 40 at one point vessels that we were processing. So I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. I think it does make sense to have somebody that has eyes on the water. We did have a prevention program for the 8 law enforcement jurisdictions. As a team, we started to work together to teach an officer in each of the departments how to do the program, or a port employee or a finance employee. It doesn't necessarily have to be called a harbor master. But that approach, I believe, has worked well for Bainbridge Island. I'm 3/4 FTE. Part of that time is tracking overtime vessels. It also deals with vessels dragging, vessels listing. We want to get to them before they sink. Vessels that are expired. It also involves buoy enforcement and anything on the waters of the island and the laws pertaining to the waters. So I'm here for answering questions and glad to be here. I'm going to give it to Troy to talk about the program.
Thanks, Tammy. My name's Troy. I work for the Department of Natural Resources in the Derelict Vessel Removal Program, and I'm the program manager. So what is the program? The program allows local agencies, government agencies, as well as the state to deal with these abandoned and derelict vessels. It's a mechanism in which they can deal with them. It's just one mechanism. It also provides a database for all of the reported vessels to us so that we can track them and hopefully find owners and encourage responsible ownership of those vessels. The program also provides funding, and it's about $2 to $2.5 million per biennium at this point for the whole program. And that provides for 3 employees to run the program for the whole state. And we prioritize our removals based on their threats to human safety and the environment. Because we have the limited resources, we have to prioritize them like that. But because the program is there and it's available for local government agencies, they can remove vessels out of their jurisdiction and then seek reimbursement from us for up to 90% of their costs. And that includes in-kind costs as well as administrative costs and stuff like that. So it's a great mechanism to allow you to deal with vessels within your areas of concern. So that's authorized public entities or local government agencies and the reimbursements. But part of it is prevention. A lot of our program could do a lot better with prevention. And what I mean by that is we have a vessel turn-in program where vessel owners who can no longer take care of their vessels can turn them into the program for free disposal, which means we'll take them off their hands and we'll dispose of them properly with no cost to the owner. And that program used to be capped at $200,000 per biennium. Recently, last year, we got that cap removed so that we could spend up to our budgetary limit on that program, which isn't feasible, but it does allow us to spend $300,000, $400,000 per biennium on the vessel turn-in program. And why is that important? It allows us to get more vessels off because it costs us a lot less through the vessel turn-in program to remove a vessel than it does if we have to go out and get it. And because of that, we can prevent a lot of the impacts to the environment, as well as navigable channels and maybe even some safety issues to human water users out there. So there's a lot that we can do for prevention, and there's a lot that local authorized public entities can do, like Tammy. Tammy and I, we have worked together for a couple of years now, and Eagle Harbor is a great example to hold up as an example of something that can be done in local jurisdictions to help deal with this situation. So with that, I'd be happy to talk about some more or answer some more questions, but there is one thing that DNR is doing to try and fund the program a little bit more, and that is we're trying to go to the legislature and ask for a diversion of the watercraft excise tax, a portion of it, to come to the program, which would allow us to have about $5 million more per biennium for the program, which would allow us to do a lot more with the program. So, and with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have for me.
Other questions?
There's a question in the chat box.
Okay, Jack has one, and then we'll go to the chat box.
Yeah, still good morning. Curious as to what this seems to be more Kitsap oriented, and I've not ever talked about this with Leonard, but in the San Juans, we have an extreme problem with the amount of vessels being anchored everywhere, buoys everywhere, that are preventing our people from being able to fish in all our usual and accustomed areas, either because of just no access, can't get in there, can't set a net, or there's so many boats there that digging clams and harvesting in there isn't really safe. So the consideration that the state and local governments have for the obligation under the treaty to that we're able to fish at all our usual and accustomed areas if the state is permitting people to legally prevent us from actually doing that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Troy, you had a comment? No, there's a question in the chat. Okay.
Okay, so the question I see in the chat is about the legal issues concerning removing vessels. And that's true. The program is set up so that we do due process, so that we're not out there taking private property away from private individuals without a due process. And that process is a 30-day process by which we try and contact the owner through various means. One is putting a notice on the vessel. Another is sending out letters to the last registered owner or any lien holders on record, and putting a notice in the newspaper. And that allows the owner enough time to either move the vessel so that it's no longer an issue, or to contact us and come up with a plan. If that doesn't happen, at the end of the 30 days, then we would get the legal right to remove the vessel and dispose of it or sell it or use it however we see fit at that time. And then the owner would be responsible for reimbursing the authorized public entity for the removal or destruction of the vessel at that time. And then the levels of priority. So priority 1 is our highest priority, and that's the emergencies, the ones that we want to go out there and get really quick and fast because they present an immediate threat to human safety or the environment. And level 5 priority is a low one where it's not in danger of sinking, it's not sheening, it's not a danger to anyone at that point. So it's a lower priority. Now, we do the prioritization based off of a statewide scheme, and that's why local authorized public entities can remove vessels from their areas prior to us getting to them, because we might prioritize a vessel in your area as a level 3, but you prioritize it as a level 1 and you want to remove it, and that's fine, that's great. And that the program provides that opportunity to you, as well as the reimbursement mechanism.
Okay, let me interject here very quickly. So this is the crux of the matter. I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is the piece that the legislature needs to fund and staff, because right now, DNR, in their own words, they are relying upon local jurisdictions to do everything that Troy's just mentioned, everything that Tammy does. And I'm here to say that most jurisdictions, port districts, they don't have the resources, the training, or the ability to do that. That's the break in the chain. And that's really, to me, what the legislature needs to step up on. So thank you.
We are running at time. Marta, did you have something? You have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. So Marta Green, and I'm the LIO coordinator, but I also manage our derelict vessel program here in San Juan County. And as GI mentioned, I mean, the last 2 summers, really unprecedented anchoring and use of unpermitted buoys for extended durations here in the county. So I would be very interested, Tammy, in knowing what kind of resources you're expending to keep up on the prevention efforts. I'd also like to ask Troy maybe to convene some kind of forum to look at, how we are focusing on a prevention initiative, that we can step that up and I hope that the funding that you're requesting from the watercraft excise tax can direct more funds not only to the vessel turn-in program, but to a more cohesive prevention program. So I'd like to know who else is trying to step that up, and how we can work together on it, because that is the crux. I mean, we kept 9 vessels from imminent sinking in 2020, and have counted ourselves lucky so far this year. But it's not getting any easier up here for sure. So appreciate this conversation and future discussions going forward. Thank you.
So I'm happy to ask the question about how are we doing it? And there is just one of me, and I'm 3/4 time, but we've done 20 years of boater education and our shoreline property owners. And our boaters are really our biggest asset, because they notice the boat that's languishing, has been there a long time. But I'm working with our planning, our public works, and all of our officers that are on boats, so that we're doing the vessel registration enforcement. We're all working together. So we, with the buoys especially, 15 years ago, mapped our buoys so that we can tell when another buoy is going in, and we're doing enforcement on the regulations that are already on the book. So like for Mark, a lot of these tasks are already part of, vessel registration is already part of what our police department does when they have a boat out on the water. And we just integrate that with what I'm doing. And the time you spend in the prevention will pay off in the amount of time it takes to process a derelict and abandoned vessel.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers.
Hello. This is wonderful, and I really appreciate the people who are out there actually doing these things on the ground. And it can't be easy. It's easy to sit here and set policies, but enforcing them is a whole nother story. And we really appreciate your guys' commitment in educating and working with people. And I think this is making me feel good, because J.I. can say, Dave can say, we get into a lot of meetings where we're way up here and we're talking about the importance of taking care of our ancestral waters. But this is where it actually gets done. So, we have to work on that higher level to get the money, to get the attention, and get the resources down to the people on the ground. So I really appreciate that. And I think whoever came up with this idea of bringing this together, thank you. I don't know, it's probably a group of you. And Peter, I appreciate your comments. And I'd like to talk about the elected officials in Kitsap and that part of Pierce that we work with. They take a lot of heat. I know you guys take a lot of heat when you have to raise rates and tell people what to do to take care of the land and the water. But we appreciate that, and I think that the success of our people on this call shows that the people are backing them. And this is what people want. We just got to get the information to them. And the people on this call are doing that. And a lot of it's engagement, and I'm going to do more of it. So looking forward to it. Charlotte, any last comments?
I just appreciate the wonderful, rich conversation that we've had today, and look forward to continuing it and fine work, learn more about the fine work that's happening across the Puget Sound region by each of the organizations.
Peter.
Yeah, this has been tremendous. And you mentioned Leonard, or Chairman Forsman, sorry, the idea behind this, and Jillian, who provided a lot of support in working with the LIOs and others about this opportunity to bring LIOs into the ECB. And you guys did a fabulous job. I really appreciate you, Chairman Forsman, and Commissioner Garrido, for chairing And but I also want to recognize Kirby and Kathleen, who are sitting next to you, who
Indeed.
and Jillian, who did all the prep work. Yeah. And thanks all the speakers, but more importantly, what Leonard was, Chairman Forsman was saying about you are not just speakers, you're doing the work on the ground. And I, for one, in my role as a federal caucus member, saw some opportunities with the federal caucus, and I will take those, and I welcome further conversations with Whisper and the ECB to see where we can move forward with some of these great ideas and support the things you've brought up as needs at the local level to be successful. So thank you. And Tammy, I'm one of those boat owners that you've educated, and I appreciate that.
Okay, make sure you're registered and inspect that Peter's vessel. GI will, or otherwise GI and I will board your vessel and do our own inspection. Okay, I think I'll make a motion to adjourn there, Commissioner Garrido, Charlotte.
I'm seconding.
Okay, I know everybody's got other places to go, so wait, Chet, I'm finished. We are finished. Have a great afternoon.
All right, I want to, excuse me, I want to thank everybody. I think this first forum to me has been wildly successful. It's, you know, really learned a lot. I think some of the issues we can talk about, the integrating of salmon recovery, you know, priorities, local jurisdictions, comprehensive planning. You know, I want to see us start having a conversation about this in our land use subcommittee. And so I think that's something I'm going to pursue with in our executive committee. And also, you know, talking with in our executive committee, the other topics, and talking with our with a partnership staff or state agency folks that work on the water quality issues and derelict vessels. And after hearing what we've heard from you, it gives us the opportunity to take a look into some of those programs, and maybe we can see how we can help all of you out there on the ground. And I think that's a natural role for the ECB here, is to being supportive and helping local governments. So thank you all. That was great.